She was holding a champagne tray when her sister destroyed her in front of 400 people. Lucien Mercer didn't lower her voice. That was the thing Clara would never forget. The way Vivienne's words cut across the ballroom like she wanted witnesses, like the humiliation needed an audience to count. "You've spent your whole life waiting for someone to notice you," Vivienne said, her champagne glass tilted lazily in her manicured hand. "Nobody wants you, Clara. You're 38, alone, and nobody would even notice if you disappeared." Laughter moved through the room in a wave. Not everyone laughed, but enough did. Clara stood there holding that tray. Her knuckles went white around the edge of it. She didn't move. Then the ballroom went quiet. A man in a black suit had begun crossing the floor. If you are watching this story and you have ever stood in a room where someone you loved made you feel like nothing, drop your city in the comments below. Let me know you are out there. And if you haven't subscribed yet, please do it now, because the story of Clara Mercer is only just beginning, and you do not want to miss what happens next. Clara Mercer had not planned to be holding a tray that night. She had arrived at the Hargrove Gala as a guest, technically. Her name was on the list because she administered the Eastbrook Community Clinic, and the Hargrove Foundation made a modest annual donation to the clinic that kept her name in rooms like this once a year. She had worn the navy dress she owned for exactly these occasions, the one that photographed well but that she had bought on clearance 4 years ago. She'd had her hair done at the salon 3 blocks from her apartment where the owner, Marta, always gave her a discount and never asked why she looked tired. She had been managing fine, standing near the back wall with a glass of water because she'd learned years ago not to drink champagne at events where she might need to keep her wits sharp. The ballroom of the Aldrich Hotel was the kind of place that made ordinary people feel like they were being evaluated, and Clara had spent enough time in rooms like it to know the rules. Smile when spoken to, don't volunteer opinions, don't let them see you look at the price tags. Then she'd seen the young server, a woman not older than 22, with dark circles under her eyes and a tray that was visibly shaking in her hands, step sideways behind a pillar and lean against it like she was about to go down. Clara hadn't thought. She'd just moved. "Give me the tray," she'd said quietly. "Take 5 minutes. I've got it." The young woman had stared at her. "You're a guest." "The tray doesn't care," Clara said. She took it. The server disappeared toward the service corridor. Clara had been standing there for exactly 9 minutes, holding champagne flutes for people who glanced through her like she was part of the furniture when Vivienne found her. Her sister had always had a gift for timing. Lucien Mercer was 43, luminous, and the kind of woman who filled a room by existing in it. She had their mother's bone structure and their father's ruthlessness, and absolutely nothing in between. She ran Mercer Property Holdings with the precision of a military campaign and the warmth of a surgical instrument. She had married well, divorced better, and had spent the better part of their adult lives making it quietly, relentlessly clear that Clara was the family's disappointment. Tonight, Vivienne was not being quiet about it. Maybe it was the champagne. Maybe it was the fact that a man 3 tables over had been looking in Clara's direction twice in the last 10 minutes, which Vivienne had noticed before Clara did. Maybe Vivienne simply felt it was time. "What are you doing?" Vivienne asked, looking at the tray. "Helping someone out? You look ridiculous." The server was about to faint. "So find a manager." Vivienne tilted her head, surveying Clara with the expression she'd worn since they were children. That precise mixture of contempt and something else, something darker, that Clara had never quite been able to name. "Do you know how many people in this room actually matter? And you're playing at being a waitress. I'm not playing at anything." "That's always been your problem," Vivienne's voice carried. She wasn't making any effort to keep it between them. "You've spent your whole life waiting for someone to notice you." A beat. Perfectly timed. "Nobody wants you, Clara. You're 38, alone, and nobody would even notice if you disappeared." The laughter came from somewhere to the left. Then it spread. Clara stood very still. She had a technique she had developed over years of family dinners and company events, and every occasion where Vivienne had decided to remind her of her place. Clara called it the anchor. She would find one fixed point, a crack in the plaster, a knot in the wood, a specific tile on the floor, and she would stare at it and breathe and remind herself that she was still standing, that the room had not swallowed her, that she was more than what her sister said she was. Tonight, the fixed point was a seam in the marble floor, about 8 feet in front of her. She stared at it. and then something moved across it. A shoe. Black, expensive, moving with the kind of deliberate slowness that meant the man wearing it was not in a hurry. He was choosing his pace. The shoe was followed by a leg, and then a suit jacket, and then a man, tall, wide-shouldered, somewhere in his mid-40s, with a face that had been handsome once and was now something more complicated. A jaw that had absorbed more than one argument. Dark eyes that were currently fixed not on Vivian, not on the room, but entirely on Clara. He walked past Vivian without slowing down. He stopped in front of Clara. The ballroom noise dropped. Not all at once. It happened in concentric rings, starting from the people nearest to them and spreading outward as people turned to look, as people recognized who had just walked across the floor, as people understood what they were watching. Lucien Varek. Clara didn't know the name yet. She would learn it later. What she knew in that moment was that this man was looking at her with an expression she could not read, and that his presence had just done something to the air pressure in the room, and that Vivian had gone completely still behind her. "There you are," he said. His voice was quiet. It was the kind of quiet that didn't need volume. Clara stared at him. "You have the wrong woman." Lucien's eyes never left hers. "No, I don't." His name, she would learn, meant different things to different people. To the shipping industry, Lucien Varek was a magnate, the controlling force behind Varek Maritime Holdings, which moved cargo through 7 major port systems on the eastern seaboard. He had inherited the company at 29 when his father, Gregor Varek, died of a stroke in the middle of a boardroom meeting that Lucien had not attended. Gregor had been the kind of man who built empires by breaking things, and he had built Varek Maritime on a foundation that was not entirely clean. Everyone in shipping knew it. Nobody said it. To the waterfront, Lucien Varek was the Baron. That name did not appear in any document. It lived in the spaces between legitimate transactions, in the favors owed, the agreements honored, the debts that never appeared on a balance sheet. He was not the most violent man in those circles. He didn't need to be. Violence was for men who hadn't yet figured out that fear was more efficient. To the women who had been introduced to him at events like this one, the politicians' daughters, the heiresses, the women whose families carried the right surnames, Lucien Varek was an attractive and entirely inaccessible enigma. He attended exactly the events he needed to attend. He was unfailingly courteous. He left alone. He had been doing this for years. Clara knew none of this. What she knew was that his hand was now extended toward her, and that everyone in the immediate vicinity was watching, and that Vivian was approximately 4 feet behind her and had not made a single sound since he'd stopped walking. "I'm sorry," Clara said. "I genuinely think you have me confused with someone else." "I don't." He glanced at the tray. "You can put that down." Someone needed help. They have staff for that. The staff needed help. She didn't put the tray down. "Who are you?" Something moved across his face. Not quite amusement, not quite surprise. Something that might have been both, pressed together into an expression she couldn't classify. "Lucien Varek," he said. The name meant nothing to her. He watched her face for a reaction and didn't find one, and that seemed to matter to him in a way she couldn't explain. "Clara Mercer," she said, "and I'm serious. You've mistaken me for someone. I don't know you." "I know." He paused. "You saved my man's life. 8 months ago." Clara stared at him. "Outside your clinic," he said. "February. Freezing rain. A man was on the sidewalk." The memory arrived before she was ready for it. February had been brutal that year. The kind of cold that came with wind off the water. The kind that got inside your coat no matter how many layers you wore. Clara had been working late. She was almost always working late. And she had gone out the clinic's side door to take the recycling to the bin at the back of the building because the overnight custodian had called in sick and she couldn't leave it piling up inside. She'd nearly tripped over him. He was face down on the pavement between the clinic's side entrance and the alley wall, and for one terrible second she thought he was dead. Then he moved. Barely, one hand scraping against the wet concrete. And she was already dropping to her knees beside him. She had not been thinking clearly. She was thinking in procedures. Check breathing, check pulse. Turn him carefully. She'd turned him and found a man in his late 30s, dark-skinned, well-built, with a face that was bleeding from a cut above the eyebrow, and a set of injuries across his torso that told her, even through his jacket, that he had taken a serious beating recently, within the hour. He was going into shock. She'd yelled for the clinic's remaining night nurse from the doorway, kept one hand on the man's chest, feeling for his breathing, and done 5 things at once in the way she'd learned to do in the years when the clinic was understaffed and underfunded, and the neighborhood it served had nowhere else to go. She didn't know who he was. She didn't ask. She just fought. They'd stabilized him, called an ambulance. He'd been conscious enough by the time the paramedics arrived to grab her wrist and say something she didn't fully hear over the noise of the street. She'd told him to save his energy. She never saw him again. She'd gone home that night, taken a shower, eaten cold leftovers standing over the sink, and not told anyone what had happened because there was nobody in her life at that point she would have called with something like that. Not at midnight. Not on a Wednesday. "His name is Matteo," Lucien said now. "I didn't know his name," Clara said. "I didn't know anything about him. He was a person on the pavement." "Yes," Lucien said. "That's exactly the point." She studied him. He was watching her with an attention that was starting to feel less like interest and more like something he'd been carrying for a long time and had finally set down. "You were there," she said. It wasn't a question. She was working backward through the memory, seeing it differently now. "That night, someone arrived just as the ambulance pulled away. I saw headlights. I was 2 minutes behind him. By the time I got there, you'd already stabilized him." He paused. "You were kneeling in the rain. The pavement was wet. You'd been out there for 20 minutes. You were soaked." She didn't say anything. "You didn't know who he was," Lucien said. "You didn't know what he was. You just stayed." "That's what you do," Clara said, "when someone needs help." "No," he said. "That's what you do." Behind her, Vivian made a sound. A short, disbelieving exhale, like a woman watching something she couldn't process. Clara was aware of the room around them, the silence that had settled, the people watching. But right now the room felt far away, like it existed at the end of a long corridor and was not entirely her problem. "Why are you here?" she asked. "Because you were here." "That's not an answer." "It's the only one I've got tonight." He glanced past her briefly toward Vivian, then back to Clara. "Your sister said you'd disappear if you left the room. I wanted to verify that was wrong." Clara felt something shift in her chest. Not gratitude. It was too sharp for that. Too mixed with something else, something that had edges. "I don't need anyone to verify anything for me," she said. "I know." He held her gaze. "I wasn't doing it for you. I was doing it for me." She didn't leave with him that night. She put the tray down, carefully, on a nearby surface, because she was the kind of person who put things down carefully. And she looked at Lucien Varek for a long moment, and then she excused herself and went to find the young server whose tray she'd been holding to make sure the woman had recovered and was all right. The server was in the break room off the service corridor, sitting with a cup of tea, looking better. Clara sat with her for 10 minutes and learned that her name was Priya, that she was working 2 jobs to finish a degree in environmental science, that she'd been on her feet for 7 hours and hadn't eaten since noon. Clara went back to the main hall, put together a plate from the buffet that nobody would miss, brought it back to Priya, and sat with her while she ate it. When Clara came back to the ballroom, Lucien was still there. He was standing near the far windows, talking to a gray-haired man in a very expensive suit. He noticed her the moment she walked back in. He didn't do anything overt, didn't move toward her, didn't gesture. He just noticed, and she noticed that he noticed, and neither of them did anything with that information right away. Vivian intercepted her before she'd crossed half the room. "What was that?" Vivian's voice was low now, controlled. The public performance was over. This was something else. "I don't know what that was," Clara said honestly. "Do you know who he is?" "He told me his name." "Lucien Varek." Vivian said it like a warning. "He is not someone you get involved with." "He came over and introduced himself, Vivian. That's not involvement." "He crossed the entire room." Vivian's jaw was tight. "Do you understand what that means in a room like this? He doesn't do that. He hasn't done that, ever. Not once, at any event, with any woman. And he does it for you, while you're holding a serving tray." Clara looked at her sister. There was something strange in Vivian's face. Not just anger, something that ran underneath the anger, something that Vivian had never been comfortable letting Clara see. "I'm going home," Clara said. "Clara, you said what you said, Vivian. The room heard it." She kept her voice even. She was good at keeping her voice even. She'd had decades of practice. I'm going home. She got her coat from the coat check. She went to the door. She didn't look back toward the windows where Lucien Varek was standing. She almost made it all the way to the street before she heard steps behind her, unhurried, measured. You're leaving, he said. She stopped on the sidewalk. The air was cold. The street noise was ordinary and real in a way the ballroom had not been. Yes, she said. I'd like to talk to you, he said. Not here. Not tonight, if you don't want. But I'd like to. Clara turned around. He was standing a few feet back, his hands in his jacket pockets, and there was something about his posture that she hadn't expected. He wasn't performing anything. He wasn't angled toward her the way men angled toward women at events like this, calculating the return on the investment of their attention. He was just standing there, on a sidewalk in the cold, looking at her like she was a problem he was genuinely trying to figure out. Why? She asked. He was quiet for a moment. Because I've been watching you for 8 months, he said. From a distance. Because I told myself I was keeping an eye on the situation, and that was all it was. And tonight I walked into that room and I watched your sister say those things to you in front of 400 people, and you just stood there, holding that tray, not breaking. He stopped. And I couldn't stand there and let that be the end of it. Clara looked at him. Who kept my clinic's funding from falling through last spring? She asked. He didn't answer, but he didn't look away. The landlord who backed off the rent increase on our building, she said. The one that would have cost us 30% of our operating space. Still nothing. There were men, she said. 3 of them. They'd been following one of our patients, a woman trying to get her kids out of a dangerous situation. They stopped. Just stopped. One day they were there, then they weren't. Lucien said nothing. That was you, Clara said. He held her gaze. Why? She said. I'm nobody to you. I'm a clinic administrator in a neighborhood your kind of people drive through to get somewhere else. You saved Mateo's life, he said. I did my job. You did more than your job. You stayed in the rain for 20 minutes for a man you'd never seen before. You didn't ask who he was. You didn't ask what happened to him. You just put your hands on him and refused to let him die. Something moved in his voice. Not emotion exactly. Something older than emotion. Something settled. I've met a lot of people, Clara, in a lot of circumstances. I've seen what people do when they think nobody's watching and when they think it doesn't matter. And I've met maybe 3 people in my life who act exactly the same way either way. He paused. You're one of them. The wind came off the street. A cab drove past. That still doesn't explain 8 months, she said. No, he said, it doesn't. He didn't explain it further, not tonight. He handed her a card, a simple one, just a number, no name, and he took a step back. He was giving her room. She noticed that. He was very deliberately giving her room. No pressure, he said. No timeline. If you want to talk, call. If you don't, I'll figure that out. Clara looked at the card. She looked at him. She put the card in her coat pocket. Good night, Mr. Varek, she said. Good night, Clara. She walked to the corner and raised her arm for a cab. When one pulled over, she got in. She gave the driver her address. She did not look back through the rear window. She sat in the cab with her hands folded in her lap, feeling the card in her coat pocket like it had weight. And she stared at the passing city lights, and she thought about a freezing night in February, a man on the pavement, and the specific kind of exhaustion that comes from spending years fighting for things that nobody ever witnesses. And she thought about a man crossing a room. She had a technique for rooms like that. The anchor, the fixed point, the breathing. She had built it because she'd needed it, because enough rooms had tried to swallow her that she'd had to develop survival equipment. Tonight, for the first time in longer than she could remember, she had been standing in a room where someone crossed it toward her. Not away. Toward. She didn't know what to do with that yet. But for the first time in a very long time, she was not entirely sure she needed to do anything at all. The cab moved through the city. The lights came and went. Clara sat with her hands in her lap and the card in her pocket, and she was still standing. She didn't call for 6 days. That was the thing she kept coming back to later. Not the call itself, but the 6 days before it. 6 days of carrying his card in her coat pocket, of touching the edge of it with her thumb while she walked between exam rooms, of taking it out twice and setting it on her kitchen table and staring at it like it was something that might move on its own. 6 days of going to work and doing her job and telling herself that a man crossing a ballroom floor was a moment, not a beginning, and that she was old enough to know the difference. On the 7th morning, she called. He picked up on the second ring. "Clara," he said. Not a question. Like he'd been expecting her. Like the 6 days had been a known quantity, a distance he'd already measured and accounted for. "I want to understand something," she said. She was standing in her kitchen in the gray early light, still in her work clothes from the night shift she'd covered because 2 of her staff had called out sick. She hadn't slept. She was past the point where tiredness felt like tiredness, and into the territory where everything just felt slightly unreal. The funding that came through for the clinic in March. The Delmore grant. Silence on his end. "It was anonymous," she said. "The foundation rep told us it came through a third-party administrator, $60,000. It kept us from cutting the evening hours program." "Yes," he said. "Yes, it was anonymous," or "Yes, it was you." "Both." She sat down at the kitchen table. She hadn't planned to sit down. Her legs made the decision. "That program serves about 240 patients a month," she said. "People who can't take time off work during normal hours. Single parents, night shift workers." She stopped. "You funded that." "I made a call." "Why?" He was quiet for a moment. Not the silence of someone stalling. The silence of someone choosing their words with actual care. "Because you were fighting for it," he said, "and because it mattered, and because I had the money and you didn't." "That's it?" "That's most of it." "What's the rest of it?" Another pause, longer this time. "I wanted you to be able to keep doing what you were doing," he said, without having to stop. Clara pressed her thumb against the edge of the card on the table. "You should have told me." "If I'd told you, you wouldn't have taken it." She couldn't argue with that. She sat with the truth of it for a moment, feeling the particular frustration of being known accurately by someone who had no right to know her that well yet. "I need you to understand something," she said. "I'm not a project. I'm not a cause. If this is some kind of... It's not. You don't know what I was going to say. You were going to say that if this is charity dressed up as something else, you want no part of it." He paused. "You're right to say it, and it's not." "Then what is it?" "I'd like to buy you coffee," he said, "somewhere ordinary, and tell you the truth, all of it, and let you decide what you want to do with that." Clara looked at the gray light coming through her kitchen window. A pigeon was sitting on the fire escape across the alley, perfectly still, apparently waiting for something. "Ordinary," she said. "You mean that?" "There's a place on Keswick Street. The owner is a man named Frank. He makes terrible coffee and excellent eggs, and he doesn't know who I am." "Does that happen often? People not knowing who you are?" "Less and less," he said. "That's part of the problem." Frank's place was called The Anchor. She noticed the name and said nothing about it, and it was wedged between a dry cleaner and a hardware store on a block that hadn't been touched by the renovation money moving through the adjacent neighborhoods. The booths were cracked vinyl. The coffee came in mugs that had been through too many dishwasher cycles. The eggs were, as advertised, excellent. Lucien was already there when she arrived. He was in the back booth, no jacket, his shirt sleeves rolled to the forearms. He looked like someone who had slept in about the same way she had, which was to say, not much. He stood when she came in. Old habit. She noticed it without commenting. She sat across from him. Frank came over without being called and filled her mug without asking, and Clara decided she liked Frank. "You said all of it," she said. She wasn't interested in small talk, and she didn't think he was either. "So, all of it." Lucien wrapped both hands around his mug. He looked at the coffee, not at her, which she found oddly reassuring. Men who maintained eye contact through everything made her nervous. This looked like the posture of someone actually thinking. "My father built Varek Maritime," he said. "The legitimate side of it is real. The shipping, the contracts, the logistics operation, all of it is real and profitable and has been for 30 years. He was a genuinely brilliant businessman." He stopped. He was also a man who understood that certain kinds of business require a different set of rules. He built the other side alongside the first. "By the time I inherited the company, The two sides were so interwoven that separating them would have brought down both. So you kept it. I kept it. He finally looked up. I'm not going to apologize for that or pretend the decision was something other than what it was. I chose the empire over the clean hands. Clara held his gaze. Has anyone died because of your decisions? No flinch. No deflection. Yes, he said. She breathed in, breathed out. How do you live with that? Badly, he said. And then you get up and you go to work. He set the mug down. I'm not a good man, Clara. I want to be clear about that before we go any further. I've made choices that a good man wouldn't make. I've protected people by threatening other people. I've kept my operation intact by being the most frightening option available. He paused. I also rebuilt 4 affordable housing units in the Eastbrook corridor last year through a shell company. Nobody traced back to me, and I fund a legal defense fund for port workers who get into trouble they can't afford to fight. Neither of those things makes me good. They make me complicated. Clara looked at him. Why are you telling me this? She said. Because you asked for all of it. Most people in your position would have managed the disclosure, given me the version that kept me comfortable. Most people in my position don't sit across from someone who knelt in the rain for 20 minutes to keep a stranger alive and feel the specific kind of shame I felt watching that. His voice didn't rise. It got quieter. I've been doing a very sophisticated version of the math on every human being I've met for 20 years, calculating what they want, what they know, how much of myself I can show them without giving them leverage. It's efficient. It's exhausting. And when I watched you that night, you weren't doing any math. You were just present, completely present for a man who couldn't give you a single thing in return. He stopped. I didn't know people still did that. Clara said nothing for a moment. My sister thinks I'm a fool, she said finally, for helping people who can't pay me back. She's said it more or less explicitly since we were teenagers. Your sister is wrong. I know. Clara turned her mug in her hands. I've always known. But knowing someone is wrong and not having it touch you anyway are different things. She glanced up. Why did you watch me for 8 months instead of just coming to the clinic, saying thank you? Because by the time I understood what I was actually feeling, it had been 4 months and showing up at your workplace felt like a surveillance situation, not a thank you. He looked at her steadily. And because I was afraid. That surprised her enough that she showed it. Of what? She said. Of what I am, he said. And what that does to people, He stopped. Started again. My world has a reach. It pulls things in. People who get close to me acquire problems they didn't have before. I've watched it happen. I told myself I was staying away from you for your sake. Staying at a distance where I could make sure you were safe without dragging you into anything. But I walked into that ballroom and watched your sister take you apart in front of 400 people, and something in me decided that the distance had cost you enough and wasn't protecting you from anything that actually mattered. Clara was quiet for a long moment. Outside, someone was unloading boxes from a delivery truck, the sound of it coming through the window in short, purposeful crashes. Matteo, she said. Is he all right? Something shifted in Lucien's face. Genuine, unguarded. He is, he said. He has a daughter. She's 9. Her name is Iris. He stopped. He would like to meet you. When you're ready. If you're ever ready. What happened to him that night? Lucien's jaw tightened, a small movement. A disagreement with people who mistook his loyalty for weakness. It's been addressed. She understood what that meant. She didn't ask further. I need to think, she said. I know. I'm not a woman who moves fast. I don't trust fast. I know that too. She stood, put on her coat. He stood again, same reflex. She picked up her check. He didn't reach for it, which she appreciated. She paid it at the counter while Frank pretended to be occupied with the coffee machine. At the door, she turned back. The threatening men, she said. The ones following my patient. Lucien waited. If I asked you never to do something like that again without telling me first, I'd want to argue with you about it, he said. And then I'd agree. She studied him. That's surprisingly honest, she said. I'm trying something new, he said. She thought for 11 days. She thought while she updated insurance records and argued with pharmaceutical suppliers and sat with patients in the third-floor consultation room while they talked about things they couldn't say out loud anywhere else. She thought while she ate dinner standing at her counter because she'd never fully broken herself of the habit of eating like someone who might be called back to work at any moment. She thought while she lay awake at 2 a.m., listening to the building settle and the street outside do what streets do when most people are asleep. She was thinking specifically about fear. She knew her own fear well enough. She'd had time to study it. The fear that she was not interesting enough to hold anyone's attention past the first 3 months. The fear that whatever calm and capable version of herself she presented in public was not the whole truth, and that the whole truth, anxious, stubborn, worn down at the edges, lonely in a way she'd stopped admitting even to herself, would be enough to make anyone reconsider. She'd watched people reconsider. She knew the specific expression of it. What she didn't know yet was whether Lucien Varek's interest would survive contact with the ordinary version of her. The one who got irritable when she was hungry. Who sometimes cried in her car after difficult patient appointments because there was nowhere else to do it. Who had loved 2 men in her adult life, and both times the loving had cost her more than it had cost them, and she was still paying parts of that bill. What she kept coming back to, though, was what he'd said at the anchor. I've already met the ordinary woman. That's the woman I fell in love with. He hadn't said it exactly, not in those words, not yet, but it was underneath everything he'd said, a current below the surface of the careful disclosure, the deliberate honesty, the 2 hands around the coffee mug. She could feel it the way you feel something about to change in the weather. She called him on day 11, late, almost 10 o'clock. I'm not easy, she said when he picked up. I know. I don't mean that as a virtue. I mean it's an actual practical problem. I work too much. I have opinions about things that don't require my opinion. I'm slow to trust, and when I do trust and it goes wrong, I go quiet in a way that's apparently infuriating. Who told you that? The second man I loved. She paused. He wasn't wrong. Okay, Lucien said. Okay? Okay. No performance of unbothered, just the word. I'll tell you mine if you want. I'm not warm. I've been told I'm like talking to a wall that occasionally gives very precise directions. I don't apologize easily, and when I do, it's usually too late. I work in a way that doesn't have hours. And I've been alone long enough that I've built habits that probably look like walls from the outside because they are walls from the outside. Clara let that sit. Your sister came to see me, he said then. Clara went still. When? 4 days ago, at my office. She didn't tell me. I didn't think she would. He paused. She told me you have a history of attaching yourself to situations that drain you, that you have poor judgment about people, that whatever you felt that night at the gala was a reaction to being humiliated, and I shouldn't read anything real into it. Clara's jaw tightened. She was in her living room, and she pressed her free hand flat against the sofa cushion to keep it still. She said that. She also left a file, Lucien said. A fairly detailed breakdown of your finances, your professional history, and what she described as your emotional instability, following a relationship that ended badly 3 years ago. The air in Clara's chest went very thin. She gave you a file, Clara said. Yes. On me. Yes. A pause. I didn't open it. Clara said nothing. It's sitting on my desk, he said. Unopened. I didn't open it because I don't want to know you through a document your sister assembled, and because whatever's in it is hers to weaponize and yours to tell me if you ever choose to. He stopped. I thought you should know she came. Clara breathed, slow, measured. She has access to things like that because she controlled our family's financial situation for years, Clara said. After our parents died. She handled everything, and she kept handling it long after I'd stopped needing her to. I understand. She probably has documentation every time I asked for help, every time things were difficult. Her voice was flat and controlled, and she hated the control it required. She keeps records. It's how she operates. Clara? What? None of that changes anything I said at the anchor. She sat with that. She's going to be a problem, Clara said. She already is one, Lucien said. That's manageable. You don't know Vivian. I know enough. Something in his voice had gone quiet and certain in a way she was beginning to recognize. She operates on the assumption that you'll absorb the damage and she'll face no consequences. That equation doesn't hold anymore. Don't do anything, Clara said immediately. I'm not going to... I mean it. Whatever you're thinking, don't. She's my sister. Silence. She compiled a file on you, he said, and brought it to a man she'd never met to use as a weapon. I know what she did. That's not... She's my sister, Clara said again, quietly, firmly. And I've been managing her for 38 years without your help. I'll manage her now. A long beat. All right, he said, thank you. Don't thank me, he said. I'm going to want to do something about it for a long time, and not doing it is going to cost me. I know, she said. I'm asking anyway. Then I'll not do it, he said. For now. She met Matteo 3 weeks later. He showed up at the clinic at noon on a Tuesday, which was not something she'd been warned about, and the first she knew of it was when her assistant knocked on the office door and said there was a man in the waiting room who said he had an appointment, and absolutely did not have an appointment, but that he was very polite about it. He was a solid man with careful eyes and a scar above his left eyebrow that had healed clean. He was wearing a jacket that was too warm for the weather, and he was holding a paper bag from the bakery 2 blocks over, and when Clara came into the waiting room, he stood up and looked at her for a moment without speaking. Matteo Rivas, he said finally. I know, she said. I brought... He held up the bag. Lucien said coffee was probably a bad idea as a first gesture, and I should bring food instead. These are Cuban pastries from Domingo's. He told you to bring pastries. He said you ate standing up and probably hadn't had lunch. Clara looked at the bag. She looked at Matteo. She thought about a pavement in February, and a man who was bleeding, and a night she'd never told anyone about because there was no one to tell. Come back to my office, she said. He came. She closed the door. They sat across from each other with the pastries between them, and she poured water from the pitcher on her desk, and they were quiet for a moment in the particular way of two people who have met before in circumstances too extreme for small talk and are now trying to find the ordinary register. I have a daughter, he said. Iris. She's 9. Lucien told me. I wasn't home the night you found me. He turned his water glass in his hands. I'd been gone 2 days. She thought I was on a work trip. He paused. She didn't find out what actually happened until about a month after, when I couldn't hide the recovery anymore. He stopped. She knows I'm alive because a woman she'd never met stayed in the rain and refused to stop. Clara felt the back of her throat go tight. I just did what I could, she said. I know, he said. That's the part that gets me. You didn't do it because you knew it mattered. You did it because you didn't consider not doing it. She looked at the wall behind him. Is she okay? Clara asked. Iris. Matteo's face changed, full and uncomplicated, the way a father's face changes when someone asks about his child. She's incredible, he said. She's building a model of the solar system for a school project, and she's furious that it keeps coming out too small to accurately represent the distances between planets. She's right to be furious, Clara said. That problem is basically unsolvable at normal model scales. Matteo smiled. A real one. That's exactly what she said. They ate the pastries. They talked for 40 minutes, which became an hour, which became the longest Clara had gone without checking her email in 6 months. He told her about the work, obliquely, in the way of a man describing a job without describing its contents. And she told him about the clinic, the funding fight, the evening hours program, the 240 patients a month. He listened with the focused attention of someone who had worked for years alongside a man who considered listening a strategic skill. When he stood to leave, he paused at the door. He's not good at this, Matteo said. At what? Allowing himself to want something. He kept his voice straightforward, factual. He'll do something wrong. He'll pull back at the wrong moment or push when he should wait. He's been running his own machinery alone for a long time, and the machinery isn't designed to accommodate someone else. I know, Clara said. I'm not defending him. I know that too. Matteo nodded. He seemed satisfied by that in a way she didn't entirely understand. He hasn't brought anyone to Frank's, he said at the door. In 22 years of going there. He left before she could answer. The call came on a Thursday night, 3 days after she'd seen Matteo, 11:17 by the clock on her kitchen wall. Vivienne. Clara almost didn't pick up. Her thumb hovered for 3 full rings. Then she pressed accept and brought the phone to her ear and said nothing, because she was done being the one who spoke first into the silence. "I need to talk to you." Vivienne's voice was different, not the ballroom voice, not the clinical precision of the office. Something strained underneath it, like a support beam that had been carrying weight for too long and was beginning to show the stress. "Then talk," Clara said. "In person." "It's 11 at night, Vivienne." "I know what time it is." A pause. Something in the background. A door, maybe, or a window. "Clara, please." The word did something to her that she didn't expect. Not because Vivienne had never said it, but because of how it sounded this time. Scraped down to the bone. "Where are you?" Clara asked. "My office. I've been here since 7 this morning." Another pause. "I found something. In the company accounts. I need someone who isn't on payroll to look at this with me." Clara straightened. "What kind of something?" "The kind that doesn't happen by accident." Vivienne's voice went lower. "Someone has been moving money through Mercer property, slowly, carefully, for at least 18 months. She stopped. "Clara, someone inside the company has been using our accounts as a pass-through." Clara stood up from her couch. "For what?" she said. Vivienne said a name that landed in the middle of Clara's chest like something dropped from a height, because it was a name Clara had heard exactly once before. From Lucien, in passing, describing a man she'd understood to be on the far edges of a world she was only beginning to learn existed. "How did that name get connected to your company?" Clara said. "I don't know yet," Vivienne said, "but I need you to come here." And Clara, her voice cracked, just barely, just for a second. "Don't tell Lucien Varek, not yet, please." Clara stood in her kitchen with the phone pressed to her ear and the night outside her window and the feeling of solid ground becoming something she was no longer certain of underfoot. "I'm on my way," she said. Vivienne made 3 calls in 12 minutes. The CFO first, a man named Gerald Hatch, 61 years old, who answered on the 4th ring with the voice of someone who had been awake anyway, which Vivienne noted without commenting on. She told him what she needed. He said he'd be there in 30 minutes. She said 20. He said he'd try. Then the outside counsel, a woman named Priya Solan, who had handled Mercer Properties' legal exposure for 9 years, and who did not ask unnecessary questions, which was the primary reason Vivienne kept her. Priya said she'd call her forensic accounting contact and have someone on the MWD partition by morning. Vivienne said she needed it faster. Priya said she understood. Then the company's head of IT security, a younger man, 34, named West, who had been hired 2 years ago specifically because he was the kind of person who answered his phone at any hour and did not require explanation before acting. Vivienne told him to lock Carmichael's credentials across all systems immediately, not suspend, not flag. Lock, archive, and document the timestamp. West said it would take 8 minutes. Vivienne said 7. She hung up and put the phone on the desk and looked at Lucien, who had been standing at the window during all 3 calls with his back partly turned, giving her room without leaving the room. Clara was at the edge of the desk. She hadn't moved much since Vivienne had made the decision. She was watching everything with the focused stillness of a woman filing information she didn't yet know how to use. "Hatch," Lucien said, "your CFO, how long has he had access to the MWD accounts?" "Same as the others," Vivienne said, "from the beginning of the subsidiary." "And his history before Mercer?" 20 years in commercial real estate finance. 2 previous firms, both legitimate, both verifiable. I verified them myself when I brought him on. Lucien turned from the window. "What about his personal finances?" Vivienne's jaw tightened. "I don't surveil my employees' personal finances." "No," Lucien said, "but I might." He looked at one of his men in the doorway. A brief look, a small nod, and the man stepped back into the corridor and pulled out a phone. Clara watched this exchange. She watched the efficiency of it, the way his world operated on gestures and understood silences, and she felt the ground-level reality of what she had walked into more sharply than she had felt it yet. This was not a man managing a crisis. This was a man who had been managing crises for so long that crisis had become his native language. "What are we actually trying to prevent?" Clara said. "Tonight, specifically." Lucien looked at her. "Carmichael reporting back to Voss before we control the narrative," he said. "If Voss knows the accounts have been found, he accelerates. He doesn't need 14 months of buildup anymore. He can release whatever he has early, accept a partial result, and still create enough damage to force a distressed sale. And if we lock Carmichael out first? Then Voss doesn't know what Vivian knows. He thinks his man is still operational. He waits. Lucien moved to the desk, looked at the documents again. We use that window. To do what? Vivian said. To make his evidence unusable. He picked up the account structure printout. The trail he's building goes from your subsidiary through 3 shells to a connection with his network. We need to document that trail independently, our own forensic record, and simultaneously create a counter-narrative that shows the transfers were unauthorized, that Carmichael acted without Mercer Properties' knowledge, and that the company itself is a victim. He set the paper down. If we do that correctly, and we do it before he moves, then whatever he tries to release becomes a story about a crime committed against Mercer Property rather than by it. Vivian looked at him steadily. That's a lot of moving parts. Yes. And it requires everything to go right tonight. Most of it, he said. The parts that can't go wrong tonight are the Carmichael lockout and the forensic documentation. Everything else has more room. What can go wrong? Clara said. Lucien met her eyes. Carmichael might already have reported in tonight, before West locks the credentials. If Voss already knows... He stopped. Then we're working a different problem. The office hummed. Somewhere in the building's bones, the ventilation cycled. Vivian said quietly, My company took 22 years to build. Nobody answered her. There wasn't an answer available. It was not a statement that wanted one. Gerald Hatch arrived at 23 minutes past 4. He was a compact man with a gray beard kept short and eyes that assessed a room in the first 3 seconds of entering it. He stopped when he saw Lucien. A full stop. Body, movement, the slight parting of his mouth that preceded speech but did not produce it. Mr. Hatch, Vivian said. Sit down. That's Lucien Varek, Hatch said. I know who it is, Vivian said. Sit down. Hatch sat down. He put his briefcase on the floor beside the chair and folded his hands on his knees and looked from Vivian to Lucien to Clara with the careful expression of a man doing very rapid risk calculation. Why is Lucien Varek in your office at 4 in the morning? He said. Because I need him here, Vivian said, and because in about 2 minutes I'm going to show you something in the MWD accounts that's going to explain why I need everyone in this room. She showed him. Hatch looked at the transaction data for 4.5 minutes without speaking. He pulled the printouts toward him one by one, went back to 2 of them, held them side by side. His breathing changed, not dramatically, but enough. The specific change of someone looking at something they'd seen before and were pretending they hadn't. Clara noticed it. She looked at Lucien. He was already watching Hatch. You've seen this before, Clara said. Hatch looked up. His eyes went to her. He didn't know her well, said they'd met twice at company events, and something in the way he looked at her said he was trying to recalculate who she was in the current equation and whether she was dangerous. I don't know what you mean, he said. The routing structure, Clara said. You're not surprised by it. You're looking at it like you're placing something, not discovering something. I'm a CFO. I look at account structures every day. You looked at the third printout twice, she said. Then you held it next to the first one. You were checking something specific, something you already knew to look for. Hatch looked at Vivian. Vivian was looking at him with an expression that Clara had never seen on her sister's face before. Not anger. Not the controlled fury of the ballroom or the boardroom. Something colder. The expression of a woman watching a door she'd believed was solid turn out to be plywood. Gerald, Vivian said, quietly. Hatch set the printouts down. I found discrepancies 6 weeks ago, he said. The room did not change. The air did not change. But something in the pressure of the room became different, like the moment before a storm when the world holds its breath. 6 weeks ago, Vivian said. In the quarterly rectitude, the same discrepancies you found. He was looking at the desk, not at her. I flagged them internally. I documented them. And then what? Vivian said. Hatch said nothing. Gerald. Her voice was a blade held flat. And then what? He looked up at her. His face, under the overhead light of the office at 4 in the morning, was the face of a man who had been carrying something for 6 weeks and whose body had finally given out under the weight of it. Someone contacted me, he said. 2 days after I flagged it. I don't know how they knew I'd found it. I'd told no one. But they knew. He stopped. They told me to close the flag. Mark it as resolved. Say nothing. And you did, Vivian said. They had information about me. His voice was barely above speaking level. Personal, financial. Things He stopped. I made mistakes 6 years ago. Investment decisions that I covered over. It was all legitimate, eventually, but the timeline of when I covered it made it look like something it wasn't. He pressed his hands together. They had documentation. They said if I closed the flag and stayed quiet, the documentation would stay quiet. The silence was absolute. They blackmailed you, Clara said. Yes. And you said nothing, Vivian said, for 6 weeks, while your company was being used as, I know what I did. His voice cracked on the last word. I know exactly what I did. And I have sat with it every day for 6 weeks, and I have not slept more than 3 hours in a row since. And I came here tonight because you called me, Vivian, and because some part of me thought... He stopped. I don't know what I thought. Lucien had not moved from the window. He had been standing there through all of it, completely still, watching Hatch, with the specific quality of attention that Clara was learning meant he was deciding something. The person who contacted you, Lucien said, man or woman? Hatch looked at him. Man. Did he give you a name? No? Describe him. Hatch described him. Height, build, the way he dressed, the quality of his voice. He described a meeting at a parking structure, midday, the man coming from the left, staying in shadow. He described it with the precision of someone who had replayed it so many times that the details had been worn smooth and certain. When he was done, Lucien was quiet for a moment. Then he said a name. Dre. One word. Said to the man in the doorway who turned and walked down the hall without asking what was needed. You know who it was, Clara said. Dre Coben, Lucien said. He's Voss's operational coordinator. He manages the contact points, the people Voss needs inside legitimate organizations. He looked at Vivian. He does the approaches. He finds the leverage and delivers the message. He paused. He's very good at it. Vivian's hands had gone flat on the desk again. Clara watched her sister and saw something happening in Vivian's face that she had very little context for, the specific crumbling of a self-conception. Vivian had spent her entire professional life believing that she ran a clean operation, that her due diligence was airtight, that the walls she'd built around Mercer property were high enough. They had been walked through, slowly, patiently, by a man who'd been inside them for 6 years. Carmichael, Vivian said, and now Hatch. Who else? That's the question, Lucien said, and the honest answer is, I don't know yet. You don't know, Vivian repeated. Not yet. My company, she said, and her voice was very even and very controlled. And underneath the control was something that sounded like the edge of something vast and dark, has been infiltrated by 2 people with connections to a criminal network, at minimum. And you're telling me you don't know who else? I'm telling you the truth, Lucien said. You want something else? I can give you something else, but it won't be accurate. Vivian looked at Clara. Clara didn't look away from her sister's eyes. He's right, Clara said. Accurate is what we need. Wes called at 4:51. He'd locked Carmichael's credentials at 4:38. Archived, documented, time-stamped. He had also, on his own initiative, pulled the system access logs for the past 30 days and found 2 additional credential uses that didn't match Carmichael's normal working patterns, both in the early hours, both accessing the MWD partition. Both of those access events had used a secondary login that was registered under a dormant vendor account from 3 years prior. Someone else had a key. Lucien took the phone from Vivian after she'd heard the information and asked Wes 3 questions in rapid succession. The vendor account's registration date, the last active billing period, and whether the login had ever been used during normal business hours. West answered all 3. The vendor account had been registered 3 years ago. Billing had lapsed after 6 months. And yes, the login had been used twice during normal hours, early in the account's life, which meant it had been established as a real account before being allowed to go dormant and then resurrected as a ghost key. Lucien handed the phone back to Vivian. 3 years, Clara said. Minimum, Lucien said. This started before Voss had a specific target. This is the infrastructure layer. He builds access points into organizations that might be useful later. Then he waits for an opportunity to activate them. He paused. The opportunity was me. When he decided he wanted the waterfront properties and couldn't go through me, he went through his existing access inside Mercer. He stopped. He was inside your company before he knew he'd need it. How many companies does he have this infrastructure in? Clara said. Lucien looked at her. I don't know, he said. That's the part of Voss's operation I've never been able to fully map. The room, already airless, became more so. It was Hatch who spoke next. From his chair, his voice dried down to something factual and stripped of pretense. There's something else, he said. They all looked at him. He reached into his briefcase, slowly, telegraphing the movement with the care of a man who understood the room's tension, and produced a folder. A physical one, thick, held shut with a rubber band. He put it on the desk. I copied the documentation they used to blackmail me, he said. The night after the meeting. Before I closed the flag, I copied everything. I didn't know what I was going to do with it, but I copied it. He looked at Vivian. And I found something in the documents they'd assembled on me. Something they hadn't specifically used as leverage, but that was in the package. Vivian did not reach for the folder. She looked at it. What is it? She said. The personal financial records they had on me, he said. They'd pulled them from somewhere internal. Not a public database. Not a credit bureau. The formatting matches our own HR financial disclosure system, the one we use for senior staff conflict of interest filings. He paused. Someone gave them our internal HR records. The folder sat on the desk. Nobody moved. The HR system, Vivian said. Who has access to that? Senior management, HR director, and… He stopped. And, Vivian said. And one external party, Hatch said. We contracted out the system maintenance 18 months ago to a technology firm. The firm has red-level access to the full database for maintenance and backup purposes. Lucien said, What's the firm called? Hatch said the name. Lucien went still, completely still, in the way Clara had come to understand was not the absence of reaction, but its containment, everything going inward and cold and precise. Say that again, he said. Hatch said it again. That firm, Lucien said, filed for dissolution 8 months ago. It is currently a corporate shell. He looked at Vivian. Its registered owner, through 2 layers of incorporation, is a holding company I have been tracking for 14 months as a Voss asset. The understanding moved through the room like a temperature drop. He owns the company that has access to your HR database, Clara said. He's had access to your personnel records for 18 months, Lucien said. Every senior employee, their financial disclosures, their vulnerabilities. His voice was quiet and precise, and the precision of it was somehow worse than if he'd raised it. He didn't find leverage on Hatch by accident. He went into the database and looked for it. Vivian sat down. Clara had never seen Vivian sit down in her own office the way she sat down in that moment, not the controlled lowering of a woman taking her position, but the sitting down of someone whose legs had made a decision without consulting the rest of her. He built a map, Vivian said, of my entire senior staff. Yes. He knows what everyone is afraid of. Yes. Then Carmichael and Hatch aren't the only ones he's approached, she said. Probably not, Lucien said. Vivian put her hands on the desk and looked at them, both of them, flat on the surface, and breathed. Clara watched her sister breathe and thought about all the years of watching Vivian operate from a position of complete control. All the years of Vivian knowing everything before anyone else did, managing outcomes before they arrived, running scenarios with the precision of someone who had never once been genuinely surprised. Vivian had been surprised, deeply, structurally, foundationally surprised, and the particular cruelty of it was that the surprise had been built slowly, carefully, over years, by people inside her own walls. Clara moved around the desk without thinking about it. She pulled the empty chair close to Vivian's and sat in it, close enough that their shoulders were almost touching. Vivian looked at her, not gratitude, not warmth, but something that was the absence of the distance that was usually there, and in the language of the two of them, that was its own thing. We can fix this, Clara said. Can we? Vivian said. Lucien, Clara looked at him. Can we fix this? He looked at her steadily. We can fight it, he said. That's different from fixing it. Then tell me what fighting it looks like, Clara said. All of it. Right now. He told them. It took 20 minutes and covered 3 phases and required Vivian to authorize actions that would expose the full scope of the infiltration to a small circle of people Lucien trusted, which meant people out and inside his own, which meant Vivian had to decide whether she trusted Lucien's circle more than she trusted her own compromised one. Vivian listened to all of it. She asked 4 questions, all of them precise and relevant, and she received 4 direct answers. When Lucien finished, she was quiet for a moment. Phase 2, she said. You're describing using MWD as a trap, feeding Voss information through the accounts that looks like the operation is continuing while we build the counter documentation. Yes. That requires keeping someone inside the company active who Voss believes is still his, she said. His ghost key, the vendor account login. We can't lock it, or he knows. She paused. We'd be running a live feed to him while pretending it's operational. Yes. And if he figures out it's a feed, he accelerates. Same risk we discussed. Lucien paused. But the alternative is locking everything tonight, and then he knows within hours that the operation is compromised, and he has enough already built to do real damage even with an incomplete case. Vivian nodded slowly. So we run the trap. If you agree. Vivian looked at Clara. Clara held her sister's gaze and thought about every room she'd ever stood in where Vivian had been the one making the decisions. And about this room, right now, at 5 in the morning, with the documents on the desk, and the bad coffee, and the folder Hatch had brought, and the weight of 22 years of someone's work sitting in the balance. It's your company, Clara said. Your call. I know, Vivian said. I'm not asking you to make it. I'm asking you whether you trust him. Clara looked at Lucien. Lucien looked back at her without adding anything to the look, without performing confidence or asking for faith. Just looking at her the way he'd looked at her in the anchor, 2 hands on a coffee mug, choosing his words. Yes, Clara said. I trust him. Vivian turned to Lucien. Then we run the trap, she said. The next 4 hours moved fast. Priya Solon arrived at 5:20 with a forensic accountant named Dale, who wore a rumpled jacket and immediately took Hatch's seat and began working through the account structure with the focused efficiency of someone who billed by the hour and understood that urgency had a cost. Lucien's man, the one who'd gone down the hall with a phone at Lucien's single word, came back at 5:45 with a document that Lucien read and then passed to Clara without comment. It was Gerald Hatch's financial disclosure from 3 years prior, clean. The discrepancy Hatch had described, the investment decision, the timeline, was visible in it, but it was exactly what Hatch had said. An optics problem, not a legal one. The kind of thing that looked worse than it was if you didn't have context and chose not to look for context. They had used it anyway. Clara looked at Hatch, who was sitting in the corner chair, coffee in hand, looking like a man waiting for a verdict. He caught her looking and didn't look away. You should have told her immediately, Clara said. Not accusatory, just factual. I know, he said. 6 weeks of this carrying it alone. I know. He looked at his coffee. My wife kept asking me what was wrong. Every morning. I couldn't. He stopped. You don't know what it's like to have something like that and not be able to say it out loud. Clara looked at the wall. Actually, she said, I have some idea. She left him there and went to find Lucien. I was in the corridor outside the office, phone to his ear, speaking in the low, rapid cadence he used when he was coordinating something that required precision. He saw her coming and held up one finger, 1 minute, and finished the call and put the phone away. What? He said, looking at her face. There's something you need to tell me, she said, and I think you've been deciding whether to tell me for the last 2 hours. He looked at her. The waterfront properties, she said. The MWD acquisition portfolio. The 6 parcels Voss wants. You said you've been blocking his approaches in that corridor for 2 years. Yes. How? She said. He's been approaching sellers and you've been blocking him. What does that mean, specifically, in terms of what you've been doing? Lucien was quiet for 3 seconds. I've been acquiring them myself, he said, through shell structures, pulling them out of the market before he can get to them. Through who? Another pause. Through MWD, he said. Clara stood in the corridor and let that land and felt it land and understood what it meant. Mercer Waterfront Development, she said. Yes. My sister's subsidiary. Yes. You have been conducting acquisitions through my sister's company, Clara said slowly, without her knowledge. Not without. The acquisitions are legitimate. The properties are real. The transactions are clean. The legal structure is sound. Vivian's company has been compensated at above-market rates for every facilitated transaction. She has made money. He stopped. She simply didn't know where the instructions were originating. Because someone inside MWD was taking your direction, Clara said. Not Carmichael. Not the ghost key. Someone else. He did not answer. Lucien. Her voice had gone quiet. The kind of quiet that was not calm. Is there a third person inside Vivian's company that you put there? He looked at her. Not to compromise her, he said. To protect the acquisitions. To make sure the transactions went through correctly and that nobody, including Voss, could track them back to me. How long? She said. 2 years. Clara pressed the back of her head against the corridor wall and stared at the ceiling. She breathed in. She breathed out. You have someone inside my sister's company, she said, working for you. While we have been sitting in her office for the last 4 hours talking about the people Voss has inside her company. It's not equivalent, he said. My person hasn't compromised Vivian's operation. My person has… Lucien, her voice cut through his. Does Vivian know? His jaw set. No, he said. You have to tell her, Clara said. If I tell her tonight, in the middle of this, you have to tell her, Clara said again. Right now, before this goes any further, before she signs off on anything else. It will blow the entire… I don't care. She pushed off the wall and faced him squarely, and her voice was not raised and her hands were still, and she meant every word with a precision she hadn't known she was capable of. I told her I trusted you. I said that to my sister in her office at 5 in the morning after the worst night of her professional life. I said I trusted you. She stopped. If you go back in there and run this operation knowing you have someone inside her company and she doesn't know it, then I was wrong. And I'm not willing to be wrong about this. Lucien looked at her. Something happened in his face. Not argument, not calculation. Something that moved through the argument and the calculation and came out the other side and left something that was simply the face of a man being held to a standard he had not expected and recognizing that the standard was correct. All right, he said. Now, she said. Now, he said. He pushed off the wall and walked back into the office, and Clara followed him, and Vivian looked up from the desk where she was sitting with Dale, the forensic accountant, and something in Lucien's posture when he walked in made Vivian's eyes go sharp and still before he'd said a word. There is something I need to tell you, Lucien said, and I should have told you 2 hours ago. And outside the windows, the city was beginning to lighten at the edges, the specific gray that preceded dawn, and Clara stood in her sister's office at the end of the longest night she could remember, and understood with absolute clarity that there was no version of the person she had been yesterday that was going to be sufficient for what came next. Vivian didn't explode. That was the thing Clara had braced for. The eruption. The cold surgical fury Vivian deployed when she'd been cornered, the precision dissection she'd been perfecting since they were teenagers. Clara had stood slightly to Lucien's left when he told her, close enough to intervene if the room went sideways, and she'd waited for Vivian to come apart at the seams. Vivian went completely still instead. She sat behind the desk with her hands flat on the surface and her eyes on Lucien, and she did not blink for a long time. Dale, the forensic accountant, had the intelligence to find something to look at on his laptop. Hatch stared at the floor. Priya Solon set her pen down very carefully. Your person, Vivian said. Name. Reyes, Lucien said. Elena Reyes, your acquisitions coordinator. She's been in the role for 22 months. Vivian breathed in through her nose. I hired her. Yes. She applied. She had references. She had a history. All accurate, Lucien said. She was qualified for the role. The references were real. I didn't fabricate her background. I identified someone who was already qualified and who agreed to facilitate the acquisitions as a secondary function. You recruited my employee, Vivian said. Yes. While she was working for me. Before she came to you. The approach was made before she applied. He kept his voice level. Not apologetic. He wasn't someone who performed apology, but stripped of defense, offering the facts without softening them. She came to Mercer because the position was a fit for the work I needed done. She did her job for you correctly. There was no sabotage, no data extraction, no action taken against Mercer's interests. You decided what my interests were, Vivian said. Yes. The word landed. You decided, Vivian said again, and her voice was still controlled, and that control was more frightening than volume would have been, that acquiring waterfront properties through my subsidiary, without my knowledge, without my consent, was not against my interests. I decided that if you'd known, you would have refused, and that the properties needed to be pulled from Voss's reach before he could acquire them. He paused. I was right about all three parts of that. That is not... Vivian stopped, started again. That is not how you treat someone's company. No, Lucien said. It isn't. The room waited. Clara told you to tell me, Vivian said. Not a question. Yes. Vivian looked at Clara. Clara met her sister's eyes and didn't offer anything. No reassurance, no explanation. She had asked him to tell the truth, and he had told it, and the rest was Vivian's to do with as she chose. How much? Vivian said, turning back to Lucien. Total acquisition value, through MWD. 41 million over 22 months, he said. Mercer took a 6% facilitation fee on each transaction. That's approximately 2.4 million in fees your company received and recorded as legitimate acquisition income. Vivian closed her eyes for 3 seconds. When she opened them, they were the eyes of a woman doing mathematics she did not enjoy. The fee income is in our books, she said. Yes. Audited? Yes. If this comes out, it won't look like what it is, Lucien said, because what it is, a series of legitimate real estate transactions at above market rates, is not illegal. The structure was clean. I was careful about that specifically. You were careful about that, Vivian said. For your sake. Yes, he said, and as a consequence, also for yours. Vivian stood up. She walked to the window. She stood with her back to the room and looked at the gray pre-dawn city, and nobody said anything, and the silence had a texture to it, dense and specific, the texture of a room where a large decision is being assembled in real time. Clara watched her sister's back, the set of the shoulders, the way Vivian's right hand had come up and was pressing, flat-palmed, against the window glass. She had seen that gesture before. Vivian did it when she was containing something large. Reyes, Vivian said, still facing the window. Is she here? In the building? No, Lucien said. She's at home. Call her in, Vivian said. Now, I want her at this desk in 40 minutes. Lucien looked at Clara. Clara gave him nothing either way. This was Vivian's call. He made the call. Elena Reyes arrived in 37 minutes. She was 30 years old with sharp, careful eyes and the posture of someone who had learned early that rooms noticed how you carried yourself. She came through the office door and looked at Vivian, then at Lucien, then at Clara, and her face moved through something complex and arrived at a place that was not quite resignation and not quite relief. Somewhere between the two, the specific expression of a person who has been waiting for a particular moment, and now that it has arrived, feels less prepared for it than expected. Sit down, Vivian said. Reyes sat. Tell me what you facilitated, Vivian said. All of it, from the beginning, Reyes told her. It took 16 minutes and was precise and complete, and she did not hedge or minimize, which Clara suspected was a quality Lucien had specifically selected for. When she was done, Vivian asked 4 questions and received 4 direct answers and then was quiet. You did your job, Vivian said finally. Yes, Reyes said. You did it well. I tried to. You are also the reason, Vivian said, that 6 legitimate property acquisitions were conducted through my company without my knowledge by a man I had never met. She paused. How do you square those 2 things? Reyes looked at her steadily. I followed instructions I believed were legal and that I was told would not harm Mercer's operation. Both of those things were true. She paused. I also understood that I was doing something your company wouldn't have agreed to if asked. I made a choice about whose instructions I prioritized. She stopped. I don't have a clean answer for that. No, Vivian said. You don't. She looked at Reyes for a long moment. Stay in the building, Vivian said. I'm not done with you yet. At 6:43 in the morning, Voss moved. Lucien's phone went first, a message from one of his network contacts, 3 words and a number. He read it, and his jaw went tight, and he looked at Clara. "He knows," Lucien said. "Carmichael contacted him," Clara said, "before the lockout. He was already moving toward the desk. He got a message out before Wes locked the credentials. We had a window and he used it." Vivian came off the window. "What does he know?" "That the accounts have been found," Lucien said. "That's the minimum. Depending on what Carmichael had access to before the lockout, he may know we're in this office right now." He looked at the room. A rapid assessment, the kind Clara was learning to read as the shift from planning mode to operational mode, the gear change that happened when the timeline collapsed. "We have maybe 2 hours before he activates whatever he has pre-built. Press contacts, regulatory tip lines, financial journalists. He's been building a case. He doesn't need it to be complete. He needs it to be loud enough to start an investigation." 2 hours, Vivian said. "Maybe less." "Then what do we do in 2 hours? Lucien's phone went again. He looked at it. Something changed in his face. A tightening that was different from the tightening before. Something that went deeper and colder. He turned the phone so Clara could see the screen. It was a photograph. Taken from a distance, slightly blurred, but clear enough. Clara, standing in the corridor outside Vivian's office. Timestamp from 40 minutes ago. She was in the frame, her face identifiable, and behind her through the office doorway, just visible, was Lucien. Someone had been in the building. "Roy," Clara said. "The security guard." "Possibly," Lucien said. "Or the building has cameras on a network Voss's people accessed. Either way," he put the phone down. "He knows you're here. He knows you're connected to this." Clara felt her chest go tight. Not fear exactly. Something more specific than fear. The feeling of a perimeter she hadn't known existed collapsing inward. "He's going to use her," Vivian said. She wasn't asking. "If he can connect Clara to me publicly, which that photograph does, then yes. She becomes leverage." Lucien's voice was precise and without inflection. "He'll threaten to expose the connection between you, me, and Mercer. He'll frame it as a criminal consortium. Your clinic's funding comes from a man with organized crime connections, facilitated by a family company already under investigation. The narrative writes itself." "My clinic," Clara said. "He doesn't know what your clinic is to you," Lucien said, "but he'll find out quickly." Clara stood in the center of the office with the morning light beginning to press against the windows and thought about 240 patients a month and an evening hours program, and a woman named Priya who had been on her feet for 7 hours and hadn't eaten, and all the ordinary, unremarkable, essential work that happened inside a building that could be destroyed by a single news cycle if the story was told a certain way. "Call Matteo," she said. Lucien looked at her. "Call Matteo," she said again. "You said you have people who can move fast. You said you have a counter-narrative we can build. Stop explaining what Voss can do and start doing what we can do, right now, in the next 2 hours. Lucien held her gaze for 1 second. Then he was on the phone. The next 90 minutes were the most compressed Clara had ever lived through. Matteo arrived at 7:15. He came in through the building's service entrance with 2 men Clara hadn't seen before, and a hard drive that he put directly on the desk without preamble. The hard drive contained, he told Vivian, without looking at Lucien, 14 months of documented acquisition trails, shell company registrations, and financial routing maps that traced Voss's waterfront operation from origin to endpoint. "You've been building this," Vivian said. "Lucien has," Matteo said. "Since before Voss made his first approach to the waterfront properties. He anticipated it." He paused. "The documentation is complete enough to hand to a federal financial crimes unit and have it be actionable." "Why hasn't he handed it over?" Vivian said. "Because handing it over ends his operations autonomy in the waterfront corridor," Matteo said. "The investigation would touch things adjacent to his own structure." He said it plainly, without apology. "He's been holding it as a deterrent, evidence he could use if Voss escalated." "Voss has escalated," Vivian said. "Yes," Matteo said. "Which is why I'm putting it on your desk." Vivian looked at Lucien across the room. Lucien was standing near the door. He had not told Matteo to bring it. Clara understood that immediately, and she saw from Vivian's face that Vivian understood it too. Mateo had made an independent call. He had brought the deterrent to the table without being asked, because the situation had reached the point where holding it served no one. "If I take this to the regulators," Vivian said to Lucien, "it opens an investigation that reaches your operation." "Yes," Lucien said. "You knew Mateo was going to bring it." "I knew he might," Lucien said. "I didn't instruct him to." "But you didn't call him and tell him not to," Vivian said. Lucien said nothing. Vivian picked up the hard drive and turned it in her hands. It was a small thing, unremarkable looking, the kind of object that carried weight disproportionate to its size. "Clara," Vivian said. "Don't ask me," Clara said. "That's his call, and yours." "I'm not asking you what to do with it," Vivian said. "I'm asking you whether the man standing across this room from me just chose this city over himself." Clara looked at Lucien. He was looking at the floor. A rare thing. A man who maintained eye contact with everything looking at the floor of her sister's office in the early morning light, and Clara understood what it meant because she had learned to read him imperfectly in the months since a card on a sidewalk, and what it meant was that he had arrived at the edge of something and was standing at it. "Yes," Clara said. "I think he did." Vivian set the hard drive on the desk. "Then let's finish this," she said. At 7:51, Voss made contact. Not through a journalist, not through a regulatory tip line. Directly. A call to Vivian's personal cell from a number that showed no registration. A voice she had never heard before, smooth and unhurried. The voice of a man who was accustomed to making calls like this. She put it on speaker. Lucien had asked her to. She'd agreed. "Ms. Mercer," the voice said, "I think we've reached a point where a conversation is overdue." "Mr. Voss," she said. A pause. "You know my name." "I know considerably more than your name," she said, "as of approximately 4 hours ago." Another pause. Longer. "Then you know the position you're in." "Tell me how you see it," she said. "Your subsidiary has been processing funds connected to my network for 14 months, he said. "I have documentation. I have a former employee willing to testify that he acted under instructions from within your company. I have a forensic accounting report tying the transactions to Mercer Properties senior management." He stopped. "I can have all of that in the hands of 3 financial journalists and the regional SEC office by 9 a.m. "And what do you want instead?" Vivian said. "A conversation about the MWD acquisition portfolio," he said. "Specifically, a conversation about a transfer of 6 parcels at assessed value. Today." The room was very quiet. Priya Solon had her hand over her mouth. Hatch was looking at the wall. Dale had stopped typing. "You want me to sell you the waterfront properties," Vivian said. "At assessed value," he said, "which is generous given the circumstances. And the documentation you have goes away." "Becomes irrelevant," he said. "There's no story if there's no dispute." Vivian looked at Lucien. Lucien shook his head. One small, definitive movement. "I need to think about this," Vivian said into the phone. "You have an hour," Voss said. "I'm a reasonable man." He hung up. Vivian set the phone on the desk. She looked at it like it was something that had bitten her. "He thinks we're isolated," Lucien said immediately. "He thinks you woke up this morning and found this alone, and you have nobody to go to because everyone inside your company is potentially compromised. He doesn't know about Mateo. He doesn't know about the hard drive. He doesn't know we've been in this room for 6 hours building a counter case." "How sure are you of that?" Clara said. 70%, Lucien said. "That's not a comforting number." "No," he said, "it isn't." "The other 30%, she said. "He knows some of it and is moving forward anyway because he thinks his case is stronger." Lucien moved to the desk. "Which means we need to know what he actually has before 9 o'clock. "How do we find out?" Vivian said. Lucien looked at Mateo. Mateo pulled out his phone. What Voss had, it turned out, was less complete than he'd implied. Mateo's source, a name Clara didn't ask for, a person inside a network she was learning not to map too precisely, came back at 8:20 with a summary. Voss's forensic case covered the fund routing and Carmichael's involvement. The employee willing to testify was Carmichael himself, who had apparently been making deals since before the lockout. The SEC filing was drafted but not submitted. "He's bluffing the timeline," Lucien said. "He doesn't have enough to guarantee an investigation. He has enough to guarantee noise, a news story, a regulatory inquiry that might go nowhere. He wants you to sell before you realize the case is thinner than he's presenting it. But it would still create noise, Vivian said. Even thin. Yes, Lucien said. Enough to damage the company's standing while an inquiry runs. 18 months, 2 years. The uncertainty alone kills deals. So we move before 9, Clara said. We move before 9, Lucien said. With what? Vivian said. The hard drive, Lucien said. And your outside counsel filing an emergency motion this morning documenting Mercer property as a victim of financial infiltration. Simultaneous to Priya, contacting the Financial Crimes Unit directly with the documentation we've built tonight. He paused. We tell the story before he does. Our story. The moment we contact the Financial Crimes Unit, Vivian said, we open ourselves to an investigation. Yes, Lucien said, but you're the party filing the complaint. That's a different position from being the subject of a tip. He held her gaze. Right now you can be the company that discovered a criminal infiltration and immediately reported it. In 40 minutes you may only be the company under investigation. Vivian looked at the hard drive. She looked at Priya. Priya said, the motion is ready. I've had it drafted since 6:30. I was waiting for your decision. Vivian looked at Clara. The clinic, Vivian said. What about it? Clara said. If this goes to investigation, if Lucien's name ends up in any of the filings, adjacent to anything connected to Mercer, connected to the clinic funding, I know, Clara said. The optics alone could… I know, Vivian. I need you to understand what this costs you, Vivian said. Not what it costs me, what it costs you specifically. The morning light was full now, coming through the windows in a solid gray gold, and Clara stood in it and thought about the evening hours program, and the 240 patients, and Marta at the hair salon, and the pigeon on the fire escape, and all the ordinary, irreplaceable things that made up a life built carefully from the ground up without anyone else's blueprint. She thought about all of it for exactly 4 seconds. File the motion, Clara said. Vivian nodded at Priya. Priya picked up her phone. 8:47. 13 minutes before Voss's deadline, and the motion had been filed, the Financial Crimes Unit had been contacted, and Lucien's documentation was in the hands of a federal attorney whose name Matteo had produced from somewhere that Clara did not ask about. The office had the wrecked, static quality of a room where a battle has been fought indoors. Papers everywhere, cold coffee, the particular exhaustion of people who have been awake all night doing something that mattered. Clara was at the window. Lucien was beside her, not touching, just beside her, which in the language they were building was sometimes the same thing. He's going to call back, Lucien said. I know, she said. When he does, he'll know the filing happened. He'll have someone watching the court system. What does he do then, she said. He escalates or he retreats, Lucien said. If he retreats, we've won. If he escalates… Vivian's phone rang. Not her personal cell this time, the office line, the main Mercer property number, which was on the company's public website and which Voss would have had to look up or have already had, and the fact that he was calling the office line instead of the personal cell said something about the shift in his position. Vivian answered it, speaker again. You filed a motion, Voss said. I did, Vivian said. That was a mistake. It was a decision, she said. There's a difference. Ms. Mercer. The smoothness in his voice had thinned. Not gone. He was too controlled for that, but thinned. Do you understand what I can still do? The motion doesn't erase what's in your accounts. It doesn't erase Carmichael's testimony. It creates a narrative, yes, but narratives compete. Mine has been building for 14 months. And mine, Vivian said, has 14 months of your financial routing documentation, your shell company registrations, your network's acquisition strategy in the waterfront corridor, and the name of the operative you used to blackmail my CFO. She paused. All of it filed with the Federal Financial Crimes Unit 41 minutes ago. Silence on the line. That information came from Varek, he said. It came from my legal team, Vivian said. Varek fed it to you. His voice had changed again, flatter. The smoothness fully gone now, replaced by something that was colder and more direct. He's been building that case for a year. I know he has it. I factored it in. A pause. What I didn't factor in was him being willing to use it, because using it costs him. Another pause, shorter. What did he give you to make him use it? The question was not directed at Vivian. Everyone in the room understood it was not directed at Vivian. "Ms. Mercer," Voss said, "is Clara there?" Clara turned from the window. She looked at the phone on the desk. She looked at Lucien. He gave her nothing. No instruction, no signal. Her call. She crossed the room, stood behind the desk, and said, "Yes." "Miss Mercer," he said, "the clinic administrator." A pause. "I know about the evening hours program. I know about the Delmore grant. I know where the funding originated." Another pause. "I know what that building means to the people it serves, and I know what a sustained regulatory inquiry into its funding sources would do to its operating license." He let that sit for 3 full seconds. "Tell Lucien Varek to withdraw the documentation. Tell him to stand down. If he does that in the next 30 minutes, I walk away from the Mercer properties. Your sister's company is clean. Your clinic is clean. Everyone goes home." Clara's hands were flat on the desk. She could feel her own pulse in her palms. "And if he doesn't," she said, "then I target the clinic first," he said, before the journalists, before the SEC. "The clinic first, because it's the thing he'll actually feel." His voice was entirely level. "I've been doing this for 22 years, Miss Mercer. I know what leverage looks like, and you are the best leverage I've ever seen on Lucien Varek." The room was completely still. Clara looked up at Lucien. He was looking at her. His jaw was set and his eyes were steady, and she could see in the set of everything about him that he already knew what she was going to say before she said it, and that he was prepared for it, and that the preparation had cost him something she couldn't yet measure. She looked back at the phone. "No," she said. A pause. "Excuse me?" Voss said. "No," she said again. "He's not withdrawing anything, and you don't get to use my clinic to threaten him, or me." She stopped. "You built your case for 14 months, and we built ours in one night. You had people inside a company for 6 years, and it still wasn't enough." Her voice was even, completely even. "You picked the wrong thing to threaten." Silence. "Miss Mercer?" "We're done talking," she said. She reached across the desk and ended the call. The room held its breath. Then Lucien's phone rang. He looked at the screen. Something moved in his face, a single, rapid change, there and gone, the expression of a man receiving information he had prepared for but not wanted. "It's Dre Cobbin," he said, "Voss's coordinator." He answered it. He listened for 11 seconds. Then he put the phone down without a word. "What?" Matteo said. "Cobbin is in the building," Lucien said. "Lobby level. He says he's alone." He looked at Matteo. "He says he wants to talk, directly." He paused. "He says he has something that changes everything, and he will only say it once, and he will only say it to me." The room looked at Lucien. Lucien looked at Clara. "Don't," she said. "I know," he said. "Then don't." He was already moving toward the door. "Lucien," she said. He stopped with his hand on the door frame and turned back and looked at her across the wrecked office. The documents, and the cold coffee, and the morning light, and the 6 people who had spent the night building something in the ruins of something else. And his face in that moment was the most unguarded she had ever seen it. Not performing confidence, not calculating, not containing. Just a man, standing in a doorway, making a choice. "Stay here," he said. "Whatever you hear, stay in this room." He went through the door. Matteo was 3 steps behind him. Clara stood at the desk with her hands still flat on the surface and listened to their footsteps down the corridor and the elevator opening and closing, and then the building was quiet around her and the morning was full outside the windows, and she understood with complete and terrible clarity that the next few minutes were going to determine whether everything they had built through the night was going to hold. The elevator took 40 seconds to reach the lobby. Clara counted them. She stood at the office window and watched the street below and counted. And when she reached 40, she made herself stop counting because the counting was a way of not thinking, and she needed to think. Vivian was behind her somewhere, talking quietly to Priya. Dale was still at his laptop, still working, because Dale was the kind of man who understood that the work did not pause for the drama happening around it. Hatch was in his chair in the corner, his coffee untouched and cold, his hands folded in his lap with the stillness of a man who has run out of things to do with himself. Reyes was still in the building, 2 floors down, in a conference room, waiting. Clara thought about Dre Cobbin standing in the lobby. A man whose profession was finding what people were afraid of and pressing on it. She thought about Lucien going down to meet him and what it meant that Cobbin had come in person instead of calling, that he had said he was alone, that he had said he had something that changed everything. Men like Cobbin did not come alone unless they wanted something they couldn't get through threat. She thought about that. Then she picked up her phone and called Matteo's cell. He answered on the first ring. Background noise, lobby acoustics, the particular echo of a large interior space. "What's happening?" she said. "They're talking," Matteo said. His voice was low. Cobbin came alone. "I checked. He's alone." "What does he want?" "I don't know yet. They walked to the far end of the lobby. I can see them, but I can't hear." "Stay on the line," she said. "Clara, stay on the line," she said. He stayed. She stood at the window with the phone pressed to her ear and listened to the ambient sound of a lobby at 8:53 in the morning and watched the street below where ordinary people were doing ordinary things, walking to work, carrying coffee, existing in the part of the city that did not know what was happening on the floor above them, and she breathed slowly and waited. 4 minutes passed. Then Matteo said quietly, "Something's wrong." "What?" "Lucien's not... He's not moving. He's just standing there." A pause. Cobbin handed him something, a phone. Lucien's looking at it. Another pause, longer. "Clara, he just sat down." "Sat down where?" "On the bench by the east wall. He just sat down." Matteo's voice carried something she had not heard in it before. Something that sat below his professional steadiness and pushed up through it. "I've known that man for 16 years, and I have never seen him sit down in a lobby." Clara was already moving toward the door. She came out of the elevator into the lobby and saw Lucien immediately. He was on the bench by the east wall, exactly as Matteo had said, elbows on his knees, a phone in his hands that was not his own phone. He was looking at the screen. Cobbin was standing a few feet away, hands in his jacket pockets, watching Lucien with the expression of a man who has delivered a thing he did not enjoy delivering. Matteo was near the security desk, close enough. He saw Clara and moved slightly toward her, and she shook her head, "Stay," and crossed the lobby alone. She stopped in front of Lucien. He looked up. She had learned his face in increments over months. She knew the face he wore in Vivian's office at 4 in the morning, the face he wore at the Anchor with 2 hands on a coffee mug, the face in the corridor when she told him to be honest with her sister. She had a vocabulary for his face now, imperfect and growing. She did not have a word for what she saw in it right now. "What is it?" she said. He turned the phone so she could see the screen. It was a photograph. Old, digitized from what had clearly been a physical print, the color slightly faded, the edges of the image bearing the particular softness of film photography. 2 people in the frame. A man she did not recognize, heavy-set, dark-haired, caught mid-laugh, and a woman beside him, younger, maybe 30, with a face that made Clara's chest do something complicated and immediate. The woman in the photograph looked like Vivian. Not exactly, not a copy, but the bone structure, the way the light caught her face, the angle of her jaw, close enough that Clara felt the recognition before she understood it. "Who is she?" Clara said. Lucien looked at the photo. "Her name was Adela Voss," he said. "She was Decker Voss's sister." He stopped. "She died 11 years ago, liver failure. She was 41. He put the phone face down on his knee. "The man beside her in that photograph is my father, Gregor Varek." Clara looked at the phone. "Your father and Voss's sister," she said slowly. "Were involved," Lucien said, "for years, before Adela got sick, before Voss built his current network." He stopped. "Cobbin has been with Voss for 20 years. He knew about it. He says Voss has known for a long time that our families were connected through Adela, that the waterfront fight wasn't just business. It was personal," Clara said. "He blames my father for what happened to Adela," Lucien said. "He thinks Gregor ended the relationship when she got sick, cut contact completely. Voss believes if my father had stayed, if there'd been money available for treatment options that weren't accessible to her, Voss believes she didn't have to die." He was quiet for a moment. "He's been building toward me for 10 years. The waterfront properties were a way in, a way to take something from me the way he believes my father took something from him." Clara sat down beside him on the bench. She did not say anything for a moment. The lobby moved around them. A security guard at the desk, A maintenance worker crossing toward the far corridor, the ordinary machinery of a building's morning continuing without reference to what was happening on its bench. "Why did Coben tell you this?" she said. "Because he's done," Coben said. She'd almost forgotten he was there. She looked up at him. He was a lean man, late 40s, with the weathered face of someone who had spent years in rooms where nothing good was decided. He did not look like a man who enjoyed his work. He looked like a man who had done his work for so long that he and it had become indistinguishable, and who was now standing in a lobby in the early morning looking at that fact. 20 years, Coben said. I helped him build everything. Every contact, every leverage point, every approach. I was there for all of it. He looked at Lucien. I was there the night your father's name came up the first time. I watched what it did to him. I watched it turn into something else over years. It stopped being grief a long time ago. I don't know what it became. He stopped. Your documentation is in federal hands. The motion is filed. There's no version of this morning that ends well for him. And I've been doing this long enough to know when the math doesn't work anymore. You're walking away, Lucien said. I'm standing here, Coben said, which is a different thing. He reached into his jacket pocket and produced an envelope and held it out to Lucien. That's the name of the person who has the physical copies of the documentation he built on Mercer property, the journalist he's already contacted, and the name of the regulatory official he has a relationship with. He paused. All three are reachable before 9. Lucien looked at the envelope. He didn't take it immediately. Why? He said. Because I knew Adela, Coben said, and she would have hated every single thing he did in her name. He set the envelope on the bench beside Lucien and walked toward the lobby exit without looking back. The door closed behind him. Clara and Lucien sat on the bench in the silence he left. The next 40 minutes moved with the specific momentum of something that had already been set in motion and could not be stopped, only directed. Lucien made calls. Clara went back upstairs and told Vivian what had happened in the lobby. All of it, the photograph, the history, Adela Voss, Coben's envelope, and watched her sister's face process it in layers, the professional layer first, running implications and legal exposure, and then something underneath that, something slower and more human. His sister looked like me, Vivian said. Yes, Clara said. Vivian was quiet for a long moment. He wasn't trying to destroy my company because of the properties, she said. The properties were the mechanism, Clara said. The reason was older. Vivian turned to the window. Clara watched her sister's back and thought about what it meant to spend 10 years building a weapon aimed at a family, because you could not aim it at grief. Because grief does not have an address, and a company does. Because the need to hold someone responsible for a loss that was not one person's fault can become, over a decade, indistinguishable from purpose. That doesn't make what he did acceptable, Vivian said. No, Clara said, it doesn't. But it makes it… She stopped. Human, she said finally, in a way I wasn't expecting it to be. The journalist Coben had named was reached at 8:58. Priya made the call, calm and precise, offering a counter-briefing with documentation before the tip Voss had planted could be published. The journalist, a woman who had been in financial reporting for 20 years and who recognized the difference between a story and a lawsuit, agreed to hold pending review of the documentation. The regulatory official was more complicated. His relationship with Voss was not something that could be neutralized with a phone call. Lucien handled that one himself. In the corridor, the call lasting 11 minutes, his voice inaudible through the closed door. When he came back in, whatever the call had contained, the official was no longer a factor. Clara did not ask how. She filed it in the category of things she was learning to hold without needing to fully see. At 9:17, Vivian's phone rang. Not the office line, not her personal cell. A number that came up as unknown, and that she answered on speaker because the room had stopped pretending individual calls were private. Decker Voss. He sounded different from earlier calls. Not broken. He was not a man who broke cleanly or quickly, but compressed. The smoothness fully evacuated, replaced by a flatness that was almost worse. The journalist held the story, he said. Yes, Vivian said. Coben, he said, just the name. Among other things, Vivian said. A silence. 3 seconds, 4. What do you want? He said. I want my company clean, Vivian said. I want the documentation you built destroyed. I want Carmichael's cooperation agreement with you dissolved. And I want you to stay away from the waterfront corridor for the foreseeable future. And in return? In return, the federal documentation Lucien Varek compiled sits where it is. It doesn't go further. She paused. I'm not offering this because you deserve it. I'm offering it because a full federal prosecution of your network would take 3 years and cost my company's operational stability in the process. This is a practical decision. Another silence. Longer. Your father, Voss said. Not to Vivian. To the room. To Lucien, who was standing near the door. You know about Adela. Lucien looked at the phone. Yes, he said. He left her when she needed him, Voss said. I know, Lucien said. You don't have anything to say about that. No, Lucien said. I don't. My father made decisions I can't defend. What he did to your sister was its own kind of cruelty, and I can't stand here and tell you it wasn't. He paused. I can tell you that what you did with that cruelty for 10 years didn't honor her. It just kept the wound open. The longest silence yet. Then Voss said, Send me the terms in writing, and hung up. Priya started typing immediately. It was over, officially, by 11 in the morning. Not resolved. Things like this did not resolve cleanly at the edges. And there would be months of legal process and regulatory documentation and the untangling of 22 months of Reyes's facilitated acquisitions and the formal restructuring of MWD's account controls. But the acute crisis, the 9 o'clock cliff they had been running toward all night, was behind them. The office looked like what it was, the site of a battle conducted in chairs and on phones, with bad coffee and no sleep, and the accumulated paper of a night's worth of work spread across every surface. Dale packed his forensic tools into a bag with the methodical care of a professional and shook Vivian's hand and left. Priya made 2 more calls, answered 3 emails, and then excused herself to go home and sleep before the afternoon's work began. Hatch was still in the corner. Vivian looked at him for a long time before she spoke. You're done here, she said. I'll have HR process the separation today. Your severance will be calculated according to your contract and not reduced, because what they did to you was real, and the choice you made under that pressure was wrong, but the pressure itself was real. She stopped. If you'd come to me immediately, Gerald, I could have helped you. Hatch looked at his hands. I know, he said. I told myself I was protecting you from knowing. That was a lie I told myself because I was afraid. I know, Vivian said. She didn't say anything more. Neither did he. He picked up his briefcase and he left, and the sound of the office door closing behind him was quiet and final. Reyes came up from the conference room at Vivian's request and stood in the office doorway with the stillness of a woman waiting for a verdict she'd had all morning to prepare for. You're good at your job, Vivian said. Yes, Reyes said. That's the problem, Vivian said, because I need people who are good at their jobs and whose loyalty is to this company specifically, not to an arrangement made before they walked through my door. She held Reyes's gaze. I'm not going to fire you. Reyes's expression shifted. Barely, but enough. You're too useful and you know too much about the MWD structure to lose right now, Vivian said. I'm also not going to pretend I trust you the way I did yesterday. That trust was based on a false picture, and we're both going to have to work with that. She paused. If you stay, it's transparent. Every decision you make in that role goes through a second layer of review. If that's not acceptable, you leave with a reference that reflects your legitimate work. I'll stay, Reyes said. Then get to work, Vivian said. I have 22 months of acquisitions to document and about 100 calls to return. Reyes left. Vivian sat down behind her desk and looked at the surface of it. The cups, the papers, the folder Hatch had brought, the hard drive that had changed the morning. She looked at all of it, and then she looked at Clara, who was standing by the window where she'd been standing when Lucien had gone downstairs, still in her coat, still in yesterday's clothes, her hair doing what hair does after a night without sleep. You look terrible, Vivian said. I know, Clara said. You've been awake for... I'm not counting, Clara said. Vivian looked at her for a moment. Something moved in her face that Clara had seen once before in their adult lives. The night their father had died, in the hospital corridor, Vivian had looked at Clara with exactly this expression, as if she was seeing her younger sister for the first time after a long period of looking without seeing. Thank you, Vivian said. Clara held the look. You called me, she said. That was the hard part. Everything after that was just work. I almost didn't, Vivian said. I almost called the lawyers first. She paused. I sat in this office for an hour before I called you, telling myself it was because you were connected to Varek, and that made you compromised, telling myself any number of practical things. She looked at the desk. None of them were true. I know, Clara said. The file I brought to him, Vivian said. What was in it? I know what was in it, Clara said. I know what you had access to. It was designed to make you look... Vivian said. Clara's voice was gentle and complete. I know. Her sister looked at her. I'm not going to tell you it's fine, Clara said. It isn't. It was a cruel thing to do, and you knew it was cruel when you did it. She paused. I'm also not going to hold it over you for the next 10 years. I'm too tired for that, and I don't think it would do either of us any good. You're more forgiving than I deserve, Vivian said. I'm not forgiving you, Clara said. I'm just not making you the reason I can't move forward. She picked up her coat from the back of the chair. Those are different things. Vivian looked at her younger sister standing in the wrecked office in the late morning light with the exhaustion of the night, sitting visibly in the set of her shoulders, and the particular steadiness in her eyes that had always been there, and that Vivian had spent decades calling naivety, and was now, finally, unable to call anything other than what it was. I spent our whole lives, Vivian said, being afraid that you were going to prove something about me. Clara stopped. That I was going to prove what? She said. That you could lose everything and stay kind, Vivian said. And I couldn't. She was looking at the desk again. I had more advantages, more support, more control, and I was still smaller than you, in the ways that aren't visible on a balance sheet. She stopped. That terrified me. For 30 years. Clara stood in the middle of the office and looked at her sister and felt the weight of 30 years of accumulated damage between them, not dissolving, not disappearing, but becoming something she could hold without being crushed by it, something she could set down without abandoning. You're not small, Clara said. You've just been afraid for a long time. That's different. Vivian did not answer, but she did not look away. Lucien was in the corridor when Clara came out. He was leaning against the wall, head back, eyes closed, which was the first time she had ever seen him stand with his eyes closed in a semi-public space, which told her something about how the night had sat in his body. He heard her and opened his eyes and looked at her, and neither of them said anything for a moment. Coben's gone, he said. Matteo tracked him to the city limits. He won't come back. Where will he go? She said. Somewhere Voss can't reach him, Lucien said. He's been planning it for a while, I think. This morning was just the trigger. She nodded. She leaned against the wall beside him, close enough that their shoulders were touching, and they stood in the corridor with the weight of the night between them and the city outside the building's windows doing its mid-morning business. The documentation, she said. The Federal Financial Crimes Unit has it. Yes. It opens exposure for your operation. Some, he said. The parts adjacent to the shell structures Voss and I share in the waterfront corridor, not the core. He paused. I knew that when I let Matteo bring it. You let him bring it, she said. I called him at 2 a.m, Lucien said, before we were fully inside this. I told him where the drive was, and I told him to use his judgment. He was looking at the wall across from him. I was telling him it was his call, but what I was actually doing was making the call without making it. He stopped. That's something I do. I should tell you that. I know you do it, she said. You've seen it, he said. Twice, she said. Tonight, and with Vivian's company for 22 months. He turned his head and looked at her sidelong. I don't know how to not protect things by managing them, he said. I've been doing it my whole adult life. It's not a defense. It's just what I know how to do. I know, she said. I'm not going anywhere, she paused. But when you manage things around me instead of with me, I need you to know I'll call it, every time. I know, he said. You'll be right every time. Probably, she said. I'm occasionally wrong. About what? She thought about it. I once spent 6 months convinced my clinic's HVAC system was fine, and I was wrong, and it cost us $12,000 in repairs. He looked at her. That's the best you've got? He said. In terms of documented errors, yes, she said. Something moved in his face that she recognized with her whole chest, not the controlled almost amusement of earlier months, something that had gotten through the controls. He looked for a moment, simply like someone who was glad to be standing next to a specific person in a corridor on a hard morning. Clara, he said. What? He reached over and took her hand. Not dramatically, not with any ceremony, just picked it up off the wall where it was resting and held it in his own, and she let him, and they stood like that in the corridor for a while. The clinic, he said. It'll be fine, she said. Priya is already working on a statement. The funding trail is documentable as legitimate. It'll take some work, but it's survivable. If it costs you anything, it won't, she said. And if it does, I'll rebuild it. She paused. That's what I do. He was quiet. You don't have to manage that for me, she said. The clinic. Whatever happens to it. I know you want to. I know your instinct is to put something between me and any potential damage. She turned her head and looked at him directly. But I need you to let me fight my own fights. You can stand next to me. You can't stand in front of me. He held her hand and looked at her and said, That's going to be hard. I know, she said. Do it anyway. Yes, he said. All right. 3 months later, the Eastbrook Community Clinic opened its second location. It was on the north side in a neighborhood that had been asking for expanded services for 6 years, and that had a waiting list of patients who currently traveled 40 minutes on 2 buses to reach the original clinic. The opening was not a gala. It was a Tuesday afternoon, overcast, with a folding table set up outside the new entrance where Clara and 2 of her staff handed out information packets and answered questions from people who walked by and stopped. A woman named Dolores, 67, with a granddaughter on her hip, asked if they took her insurance. Clara walked her through it herself, standing on the sidewalk, because there was no reason to go inside for a conversation that could happen where they were. Lucien came at 4:15. He didn't announce himself. He walked up the street in a jacket, no tie, and stood at the edge of the folding table and waited until she was done talking to Dolores, and then handed her a coffee from the place 2 blocks over. Frank's? She said. No, he said. There isn't a Frank's on this side of the city. We'll find the equivalent, she said. She drank the coffee, and they stood outside the new clinic and watched the neighborhood do what neighborhoods do in the late afternoon. People coming back from work, kids on bikes, somebody's radio coming through an open window 2 floors up. Ordinary. Irreplaceable. Vivian called me, Lucien said. Clara looked at him. When? This morning. She wants to discuss the waterfront properties. He paused. The ones MWD facilitated. She wants to restructure the ownership record, put them in Varek Maritime directly, and remove MWD from the trail entirely. Is that legally manageable? Clara said. Priya thinks so, he said. It'll take 6 weeks and it'll require Vivian to formally acknowledge the facilitation arrangement in internal documentation, which she is apparently willing to do. He paused. She said, and I'm quoting, that she'd rather have an uncomfortable truth on paper than a comfortable fiction that could surface in 2 years. Clara looked at the street. That sounds like her, she said. The new version of her. She's been doing that. The 2 of you, Lucien said, have you... We're talking, Clara said. Not fixed, not repaired. That's not really what we are. She drank her coffee. We're something we haven't been before, which is honestly something. He nodded. Mateo's daughter, she said. Iris. The Solar System Project. She won the school science fair, he said. Of course she did, Clara said. She built a scale model that accurately represented orbital distances using the length of the school hallway, he said. Apparently it extended into the stairwell. That's exactly right, Clara said. That's the correct solution. He looked at her. She wants to meet you, he said. Clara held the coffee cup in both hands. Okay, she said. She knows the story, he said. The rainy night. Mateo told her. He paused. She made me describe it in detail when she found out I'd been there. A pause. She asked me what you looked like, and I told her, and she said that you sounded like someone she'd want to know. 9 years old, Clara said. She's very sure of herself, he said. Good, Clara said. They stood outside the clinic. The radio 2 floors up changed songs. Dolores walked past on her way back down the street, with her granddaughter still on her hip, and she caught Clara's eye and nodded, and Clara nodded back. The city moved around them, indifferent and alive. "I want to show you something," Lucien said. He drove her to the harbor. Not the corporate waterfront, not the port district where his empire did its work, but a stretch of the harbor that was accessible by a road that bent behind a fuel station and opened onto a concrete walkway with no lighting and a view of the water that was unobstructed and enormous. He had clearly been here before. He navigated it without hesitation. They sat on a concrete barrier above the water, the city behind them, and the harbor spread out ahead, and the evening was coming in from the east and making everything the color of something that hadn't quite decided what it was yet. "My father used to bring me here," Lucien said, "before everything, when I was young enough that the empire was abstract." He looked at the water. "He wasn't a good man. I've understood that more clearly as I've gotten older. But he was present in those years, before the weight of the thing he'd built became all he was." He stopped. "I used to think I'd inherited everything he was. The ruthlessness, the calculation. I thought it was genetic, that I didn't get a choice." "You don't think that anymore?" Clara said. "I think I'm capable of everything he was," he said. "I think the capacity is there. I also think that capacity isn't destiny." He looked at her. "I chose to let Matteo bring the drive. 6 months ago I wouldn't have." He paused. "You didn't change me. I want to be clear about that. You're not some corrective force I needed. You're a person I love, but the change is mine. I made it." "I know," she said. "I need you to know that," he said, "because I've spent a long time being afraid that any softening in me was a weakness someone would exploit. And what I've realized is that it was always a choice," she said, "whether to let it be a weakness or not." "Yes," he said. They sat with that. Below them, the water moved. Not dramatic, just water doing what water does, the endless small movement that was not going anywhere and did not need to. "For most of my life," Clara said, "I believed that being chosen meant waiting for someone to select me, like an item on a shelf. Like the right person would eventually walk by and pick me up, and that would be the proof that I was worth something." She held her coffee cup, which was empty now, with both hands. "I waited for that for 38 years. And now," he said. She looked at the water. "Now I know that I was making choices the whole time," she said, "kneeling on a pavement in February, carrying a tray, calling you on day 7 instead of day 1, going to my sister's office at midnight." She stopped. "Those were all choices I made, and they added up to something, not because someone selected me, because I kept moving." He was quiet beside her. "You crossing that ballroom," she said. "That mattered. It mattered enormously, but the other half of the journey was mine." She turned and looked at him. "I crossed the room too, just in a different direction." Lucien looked back at her. He reached over and picked up her hand again, the same gesture as the corridor, unhurried, without ceremony, and pressed it flat against his chest, over his heart, and held it there. She felt it under her palm, steady, real, the ordinary, unmistakable rhythm of a person who was alive and present and choosing to be exactly where he was. "I love you," he said. She looked at him for a moment. This man who had built walls for 20 years and then stood in a lobby and sat down on a bench, who had called Matteo at 2 in the morning and known what he was doing, who had told her sister the truth when it cost him and had stood in a doorway and said, "Stay here," and meant come back too. "I love you too," she said. Below them, the harbor held the last of the evening light, and the city spread out along the waterfront in both directions, lit and alive and entirely indifferent to the two people sitting on a concrete barrier above the water. The city did not know their names. It did not know what the night had cost them, what the months had built, what the years had stripped down to its essential components. It did not need to. Clara sat beside Lucien Varek above the harbor she had never thought to stand beside, and she held her hand against his heart, and she looked at the city that had never once noticed her and understood that she had never needed it to. She had been building her life in that city for 38 years, in clinic hallways and budget spreadsheets and midnight calls and pavement in the rain, in the ordinary, unglamorous, essential work of showing up for things that needed showing up for. She had built it herself. No one had given it to her. And sitting in the evening above the water with the empty coffee cup and the man beside her and the city glittering along the waterfront as far as she could see, she understood that this was not the end of the waiting. The waiting had already ended. She had ended it herself, in increments, over months, in all the moments she had chosen to move rather than stay still. The woman nobody had noticed was sitting above the harbor of the city. She had quietly, stubbornly, relentlessly refused to disappear from. And she was no longer waiting for anyone to see her. She had finally learned to see herself.